Good morning, everyone. I want to start with interesting, triggering questions. What do all of these issues have together? We have headaches, digestive disorders, cell damage, and so on. They're all associated with radiation. All of them show by studies that there are effects on these levels. Where are they coming from? These are our most usual sources of EMFs. Mobile phones, cell phone towers, tablets, gadgets, and so on. This is what's causing most of our exposure to our human body. The official problem looks like this. We are only focusing on the thermal effect on our body. There is heat created in our tissues when we are using a cell phone, and this is where the official problem is said to be. It's only about heating up our cell tissue, that there's burning happening, and after about 30 minutes of a call, you have a 2%, 2 degrees Celsius rise in your temperature, and this is basically what causes cell death in the end. But there's other studies. There's hundreds of studies which are showing non-thermal effects of EMFs. And so you can look them up. There's quite a few, and we'll go through a bit of that ourselves today. This is actually what is now the most common question for me in the last year. If this stuff is really so bad, then why are we still exposed to that? And usually that has to do with what? Who has a guess? Money, exactly. Bullet point, 10 points. This is how it usually looks. We have the industry, and then we have 4 organizations which are financing actually what is the ISUS International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Quite a mouthful there. So there we have 13 members, and they're pretty much doing all of the deciding on the guidelines. What is safe? They're evaluating the studies. They're looking on what is right now there on research, and what should we do about it? Well, they're getting financed from the industry, and they're members of those industry which are financing them. They are usually shareholders, and they have personal interest, like we found out. And one of the 13 is actually a biophysicist in a background. Just for clarification, this is actually the expertise field which you need to evaluate those studies, because it's a mixture on what is happening to your body from a physical outside source like radiation. So you need to be a biophysicist basically to evaluate this, and there's one inside, and they pass on this to the World Health Organization, and they usually take those recommendations completely over and then give it to the public, which brings it to the single countries where we are living in. So this is about how the structure is going. Thanks. Here you can, by the way, find the full report on that. If you really want to dig deeper into that, I would like to make a full talk about this whole lobbyism of how those standards come to be, but here you can read it yourself. Also interesting is the Finnish guy from the Finnish Radiation Protection Authorities, which sets this very famous quote, "Set safety limits that do not kill people while the technology works." This is how the standards are set to be. That's quite interesting. Another interesting part is when we are comparing this to smoking. We were just having the question on how is it that we are still exposed to that, right? So let's look through that. Smoking is quite comparable to radiation in a way. It started that in the 20s, what we just saw is that there was commercials on pregnant women, athletes, and doctors which were promoting smoking for being enhancing for your health, for training your lung, for being positive to calm the nerves and such things. It's crazy. It's 100 years ago. Well, we still have smokers today, right? It's still not banned. And we see also here that only in 1957, so that's around 35 years after those commercials were, that there was only started, that the authorities start to register that that's actually harmful. So our society, especially if there's money and lobbyism is involved, is pretty slow in adapting to those changes because, you know, there's money involved. Here we have some of the most famous biohackers and health influencers from our industry and what they said about EMFs, right? We are constantly bombarded this manners by EMF waves. It can not only distort your internal cellular communications, but also entrain your body, from Ben, for example. So we have here quite a few famous quotes, but let's start to dig in a little bit deeper. This is really interesting. What we see here is the symptoms and the health conditions which occur in correlation to what is the distance to the next phone base, so cell phone tower. Where is that? So, and we're seeing a very clear line usually of that the closer, when we are living like 10 meters away from a cell phone tower, that our problems are usually the highest. So, and we see that there is correlations and shows in fatigue, headaches, and appetite problems, depression, and such things. For me, by the way, what I found out mostly is that our body is triggered with cortisol and stress levels and changes in the brainwave, and that there also is a lot of problems with sleeping disorder. This is what I found out is pretty much the biggest problem. How can it be? How can it be that radiation is so problematic for our health? Well, I want to introduce to you this nice fellow and very renowned professor, and he has done an investigation on the cells and how it comes to be. So this is now the deep part. I promise I don't go into long. My talk is pretty short, so it will be short, but it will be deep. So stay with me. Okay, so what we see here is the cell again, and what we have here is the voltage sensor. So we have the extracellular level of the cell, and we have the intracellular level of the cell. When there is a mobile phone field, an electromagnetic field affecting those cells, so right now, for example, then what happens? This particular part gets a proton and gets open. It gets affected. It's a sensor which gets a charge which is opening it up. And what happens by that is that there's calcium rushing into the cell. And maybe some of you know, this is what happens when calcium rushes into the cell. It causes to shorten it up a bit. It's a superoxide causing oxidative stress, free radicals, and in the end, it causes pathophysiological effects in our body. What this means, it can lead to cell death. Why is that so crazy in that part of the body? The voltage sensor, which is in each cell, in each brain cell, in each hand cell, everywhere, is roughly 7.2 million times more sensitive to EMF than the rest of our body. What we found out in the research is that all non-thermal effects, what we are speaking about today, on the body can be explained with this principle on the voltage-gated calcium channels, which I just shown you. How to protect ourselves? That's the big question. There seems to be a number of diseases, a number of conditions which happen and which are problematic for us. Well, there's not so many ways. First of all, I always recommend you guys shut down and limit your exposure, shut down your cell phones, use it more in airplane mode, don't have it right on your ear when you're making the talk and such things. Limit exposure, turn off Wi-Fi at night. It's the small, easy hacks which don't cost us much and even save us some money. So those are the first parts which you should do. Limit the exposure to your body. Use, for instance, a phone which has a lower SAR value, which is producing also less heat on your body. That doesn't harm. There's options. The second part is shielding. We can shield our rooms with special fabrics, with special paints, with transforming our room into not having any more electromagnetic fields. This is a really good way. And I'm pretty sure most of you know there's many other things out there which say, we have a solution, we want to help you with this issue. Well, we are saying, okay, in WaveGuard we are focusing on making research and I'm following a principle. And this principle is called depolarization. This is actually the only other principle except limiting exposure and shielding, which is actually scientifically found from a university to work. Well, what the heck is depolarization, right? Let's go on that. It's basically called natural versus man-made EMFs. Again, here's a small QR code if you want to find out about the depolarization stuff a little bit deeper. This is found by the University of Athens, and this is what we're going into. So this is something pretty new. Nobody has seen that so far. So depolarization, as they found out in the University of Athens, is happening if you're letting a radio wave interact with a liquid. How does that look? Something like that. So as we see, when the radio wave is traveling through a solution, it breaks open, as very nicely shown here. It breaks open and distributes the radiation on a wider area of our body. And normally, when we are in the nature, this is something normal for us. We are, evolutionary beings. We have been used to something what the world is giving us, like sun ray, electromagnetic fields from the earth, and they are usually not polarized. So what does polarized mean? It means concentrated. It means like a laser beam from the start. Usually if we're doing a cell phone call, the signal is going right from our hand to the next base station tower, and that if that happens to be through our head, then there is a very concentrated exposure right there. And this is what the body is not really good in handling, because it's not used to that. We are used to having always a full body exposure, and then we are very good in handling those. This is what the university found out, and if we are breaking it open, the depolarization part, then what happens? The thing is, the body has shown to handle those effects more easily, and because the actual density is decreased, what happens here is the sensor is actually showing a reduced field strength. So you reduce the field strength measurably with a depolarization, and at the same time, what's left after that is not anymore so harmful according to the universities. So we follow this principle with our devices, and we have studied that. We have 25 studies with universities, some of the best technical institutions in the world to look at that, and we come also from Germany. So this is something really interesting. Maybe somebody has seen it from you guys. This was actually the first 5G study in the world on human cells. This is what we have done with Waveguard. We're on a cell biology institute. And what we see here is a human skin cell which is healing. It's like when you cut yourself with a knife in the finger. The cells are distributing and splitting up to close the gap, to close the wound. And, oops, that was a bit fast. Let me run it again. I wanted still to explain you. So the cell wound healing process is normally taking 24 hours to close the wound. If we are affected by 5G, then the time the body needs to heal the small wound is going up by up to 400%. It takes almost 4 days to heal a small cut. It's pretty remarkable how long it's extending, and 5G was already launched, and we were the first one worldwide to do actually a 5G study on human cells. There was no other institution that's done it, no public one, no other private one. We were the first. So it was pretty crazy that these things were exposed to us, and there was not even studies. Well, this is, again, would lead to another presentation of mine, why that is actually possible, but that's for another time. So, how did I come to that? Well, that's also, I didn't introduce myself really, so let me build that here in the last 2-3 minutes of my talk. Now, 30 years old, born in Dubai. We just had our 9-year anniversary with Waveguard. And how did I come to that? Well, actually, kind of from here. I was electrosensitive as a child myself. And I was going into nature in such cottages, literally. around above the polar circle in Lapland. I was making snowshoe hikes around 2,500 kilometers with a sledge and had there my food, and for 6 weeks through the national parks getting some more groceries, and then 6 weeks back. And what was there? There was just snowshoe walking there, no cell phone reception, no electricity, no tap water, and even at the time it was one of the last 15 places on Earth where there was a zero air pollution. Air was up to minus 54 degrees when sleeping outside. Even at that night that was pretty harsh. So, but when I came back, the radiation just was so intensive for me. It was actually complete detoxification from me, from all of this influence. And especially also I would recommend you guys again to shut down a little bit the external light exposure, because it's also some of the most interesting epiphanies from that time. Our body is so much working better when we are in sync with nature, when we are not exposed to such huge electromagnetic fields and also not to so many different light sources. It's not so nice for our body. The melatonin way is destroyed a bit and disturbed, so it's not so nice. So this was also really amazing that your body actually starts waking up with the first light and starts to get really tired again when the sunlight is down. So when I came back, I was going on this mission to say, okay, we need to produce something to making the use of cell phones more safe again and to help people protect that environment. And right now I'm also working towards a movement that we're starting to actually irradiate and emit depolarizing radiation from the cell phone towers in the first place. Because that's actually possible, that we don't always have to protect our homes, but that not everyone is in the first place exposed to something negative. And this is even possible, and this is what I'm going forward for. All of this work was also nicely rewarded, and even last year with the invention of the year from Europe last year. And this is it for today. Thank you so much.